Good day. Welcome back to First Take. Deion Sanders opened up on Monday about reports that his son, Shedeur Sanders, went into pre-draft meetings unprepared and unprofessional. The Colorado head coach and former NFL star who coached his son through college said he was hurt by the reports around Shedeur's slide into the 5th round of the NFL draft to the Cleveland Browns. Here's Prime with more.
When you sit up there and say something like he went in a meeting unprepared, like, dude, Shedeur Sanders, who's had 6 different coordinators, who has still functioned and went up, leveled up every time we brought somebody new in, and you're gonna tell me he was
every situation.
You're gonna tell me he had on headphones. Shedeur, anybody know my son, understand he's a professional. Like, he's gonna go into a meeting with headphones on. Like, y'all come on, man.
All right, Booger McFarland joining the show. Boog, great to have you with us. And I want to start with you here. Boog, what's your reaction to what Coach Prime just had to say?
Well, I think it's the correct reaction. I think it's a coach, it's a father defending his son, understanding what he heard, understanding that the Sanders name has kind of been slandered, especially during the pre-draft process, and everybody's trying to figure out post-draft why Shedeur Sanders slid. Here's what I'll say, though. I think some of this stuff wasn't made up. I covered the draft for ESPN. I'm sitting on the desk. It's Shefty, it's Mel, it's me, it's Lewis. I heard some of the same things that Deion Sanders is talking about. And S.A. and Canty, you know this, we all have relationships. We all have people who tell us information that help us prepare to do our job. I heard some of the same things. Some of these things weren't necessarily made up, at least I don't think, from the people that I trust who told me these things. And so I think 2 things can be true here. I think the information that was out on Shedeur Sanders came from a lot of people that a lot of people trust and people think that are credible. I also think that Deion can't believe and doesn't believe that his son would do some of the things. I don't know. I wasn't in those meetings. I just know covering this draft, trying to figure out why this young man slid from we all thought he was going to be at worst a late 1st round pick, maybe early 2nd, to the 5th round. I think we're all trying to figure out and piece together why that happened. But I got no problem with Deion defending his son because we all got kids. And if our kids were being slandered or some of the things that said about Shedeur were being said, we would defend them publicly also. Now, privately, I'm going to ask my kid to tell me the truth. But publicly, I'm going to make sure I defend his name, our family's name, and everything that went on. And so I understand what Deion is doing, and I probably would have done the same thing. But me, nor you, nor Deion was in those meetings, and I think we have to take the word. He's got to take the word of his son, and I think the insiders, the people that have the information that are sharing this information at us, if you trust them, you have to take their word for it also.
Booger, I completely agree with you. Here's what I will say, and this is not specific to Shedeur Sanders, but I know that NFL teams will slander a player's name when it comes to the pre-draft process to give themselves cover if, in fact, that player ends up panning out and becomes a viable starting option, especially at the quarterback position, which is one that's at a premium in today's game. Now, if the reports on how Shedeur handled those meetings are true, then that would be counter to anything we've seen from Shedeur Sanders in terms of how he's conducted himself across a couple of different stops in college football from Jackson State to Colorado. And for somebody that's grown up in the limelight, you knew that being Deion Sanders' son is going to come along with a different degree of scrutiny. So, again, I'm not calling anybody out their name or calling anybody out a liar, but I will say it's just hard for me to believe that he would be, quote, unprofessional when it comes to the biggest job interview of his career. I do believe a part of why he slid in the draft is because NFL executives, coaches alike, have tried to assign personality traits to Shedeur that they saw in Deion as a player. We can't get past Deion Sanders and the combine interview or the interview that didn't happen with the New York Giants where he asked them where they were going to draft, and he said they're going to be picking too late, so he blew off the interview. There are certain things in terms of how Deion conducted himself as a player that people are trying to assign from a personality standpoint to Shedeur Sanders, and I think that's incredibly unfair to the young man.
Let's go a little deeper here. You guys are champions. You guys both played in the National Football League. Let's get personal. You know Deion Sanders enough. Has anybody ever been in a position to say that Deion Sanders was a liar? ever. We've all talked about him for years. Have you run across anybody that said, Deion Sanders said one thing to your face and said something else behind your back? That's not who that man is. And so when he comes out and he says something about his son, there is no question he has spoken to his son. There is no question that Deion Sanders prepped his son for those interviews. There is no question. I mean, the brother threw for over 4,000 yards, 37 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, okay? Completing 74% of his passes, so we knew he could play. 5 quarterbacks were taken ahead of him. We entered after the season was over, and I know there's a window where you get to evaluate these guys once the NFL season is over, and you can lock in and zero in and stuff like that. Even though with a multi-billion-dollar establishment, it's hard for me to imagine that you can't have guys that are specifically designated to do evaluation while the rest of the team is preparing, for the playoffs and beyond, stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there. Cam Ward, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shaw, Jalen Milroe, Dylan Gabriel, all picked before Shedeur Sanders. He was projected to be a first-round pick. He was drafted 144th overall in the 5th round. 5 quarterbacks were taken ahead of him. We all know this was about Deion. Now we have to get to what the real crux of the situation is. Deion, as I told y'all, was devastated. When I came on the airwaves and talked about how devastated he was, and Molly knows this, I had not spoken to him at the time. I've spoken to him since because he called me to thank me for being accurate on what I was saying about the level of devastation that he had felt. Because it was a painstakingly thing for him to endure, to watch his son plummet, knowing it wasn't because of his ability. So if my son comes on this particular team, if this team drafts him, we might have to deal with Deion. Because if Deion ain't satisfied with how we're doing, who knows? Oh, by the way, Deion is showing himself to be a hell of a coach on a collegiate level. What if people start clamoring for him to be the head coach because we ain't doing what they think we should do now that we got his son here on this franchise? You had all of that stuff. I know of owners who went to their personnel in the draft room. You're not drafting him. That's what I was told. And I've been a reporter for 30 years. That's what I was told. So I'm looking at all of these things, and I'm saying to myself, of course I believe Deion. Is there culpability on the part of Deion Sanders? Yes. Because you don't go on national television and tell the world your son's going to listen to you. By the way, you know what? I don't give a damn what the NFL team, if it ain't the right situation, we ain't going to go for it. Because those kind of things can come back to haunt you. And I think that if Deion had an opportunity upon reflection, he would do things a little differently himself in terms of how outspoken he was leading into the draft. And Shedeur Sanders obviously said himself there may have been things he would have done differently. But that does not mean that Deion is not telling the truth. When he says, there's no way in hell my son walked into an interview like that. Once again, it's a nugget of intel where you see people trying to stain you intentionally to put a reflection upon you and your son because of their feelings about Deion Sanders. Now, he may have some culpability in that, but it doesn't make it right what's happening to Shedeur Sanders. That brother can play, and I think he's going to show that he can play on the NFL level, but most importantly than that, he has been a model of professionalism throughout his collegiate career. And for these kind of things to stain him on a personal level, to me, it just shows why so many athletes should be turned off by the process. Why go through interviews and things of that nature if you're not going to tell the truth about me? Why do that? That's a shame.
S.A., I agree with a lot of the things you say, but here's what I would ask you. You just mentioned that you know of owners that went in their personnel room and said, we're not drafting him because of Deion. So you have your sources. You have your people have your people that you know, just like we all do. So how do we decipher when we have our people that we trust and the insiders have the people they trust, and they're being told some of the same information? This stuff wasn't made up, in my opinion. Like, there are people that have openly talked about the pre-draft process and why Shedeur Sanders, who was a Heisman Trophy candidate, who I thought should have been a first-round pick, that the NFL did not see him the same way. So some of this stuff that we've heard may have been sensationalized, but I don't know if it was made up. And so I have a hard time saying, you know what, I'm going to pick and choose what I believe. I think the NFL teams in the pre-draft process had to take a look at all the information that they heard, or take a look at all the information that they found, and make a judgment based on what they knew. That's the only thing I would push back to you on.
Well, the only thing that I would come back with you is that we can compartmentalize with the word sensationalism and differentiate that, or sensationalism or embellishment and differentiate that from a lie. Fair enough. But my point is, if you're embellishing to make somebody look even worse, then essentially, in my eyes, that's a lie. Now, again, we don't have to play with those words right now. I get where you're coming from. The flip side to it, however, is this. If we've seen a Baker Mayfield who came into the National Football League with some troubles. We've seen a Ryan Leaf who came into the league, with question marks about his character at the time, or your temperament, et cetera, and he was the number 2 pick overall. I'm sure if we scour numerous NFL drafts, we'll see people who have dropped or who walked into a draft and they didn't have a pristine reputation. What we did not see was a quarterback projected to be one of the top 2 quarterbacks in an NFL draft end up having 5 quarterbacks picked ahead of them and falling to the number 144th overall pick. That has Deion written all over it, because that's a bit excessive. Under any other conditions, we would view it differently. If Shedeur had gone in late in the first round, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If he had gone in the second round, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But when it came to 3rd, 4th, and 5th round,
wrap it up,
and by the way, you saw the Browns pick somebody before they picked him, you found yourself saying, this is excessive. They're sending a message. And that is where we get to look at them with a skeptical eye, more so than we look at Deion or Shedeur.
Yeah. Here's the silver lining. The story isn't written, right? Look at Tom Brady. Sometimes you have that chip on your shoulder and it just propels your career. Still not fair what he went through, but it's just the start.